Hello, Iain. I think Preta Marjay won't do as well from now on because there's more working from home. But I'd like to ask the panel, what are the prospects of a durable peace, a peace that lasts this time between Israel and Lebanon? Lebanon, not only Hezbollah, but the whole of Lebanon.
Well, Dom Jolly, I'm coming to you because you have skin in this game, don't you?
I very much have skin in this game. So I grew up in Lebanon to an English family. We've been there three generations. My sister is in Beirut right now running the family business. My son was there over the summer and had a very exciting little gap year with my wife, desperately trying to get him to come back. I can imagine. And me going, no, it's good for him, and let him stay there. I'm in a really strange situation in this because I think I'm probably Firstly, I speak Arabic, I speak French. I grew up in Lebanon. I'm aware of it all, but I think I'm the only non-tribal person in that I know in the Middle East, because I think over the period of my life I've been shot at by almost every side, and once you've been shot at by people, it's very difficult to have any sort of sympathy with them. So my main thing is extremists of all hues need to get out of that area, and obviously I think what Israel's been doing in Lebanon has been appalling, and there's been some terrible innocent, a vast amount of innocent people killed by their recent attack. But also Hezbollah is an absolute stain on Lebanese society, and it's been a state within a state, and it's absolutely throttled Lebanon for so long. So, I hate having these discussions because there's no right or wrong. People are so extreme on either side when actually neither side is behaving brilliantly. Hezbollah have behaved appallingly within Lebanon. They have been attacking Israel and have been shelling areas of Israel, and obviously the government in Israel just absolutely going way over the top and attacking Lebanon again. They seem to attack Lebanon pretty much every sort of 12 years. They basically take out all the infrastructure, along with trying to get Hezbollah. They try and neuter Lebanon. So I don't know. I've literally just found out that there's a ceasefire because I've been stuck in floods and a thing. Is it a 60-day ceasefire or is it a permanent one? What have they agreed to?
A 60-day ceasefire, which could then be extended. But the clip that we heard from Netanyahu earlier was all about, well, if anything goes wrong, we'll still bomb.
Well, of course they will. Yeah. I mean, every time I've been to Lebanon, I wrote a book walking across Lebanon. I walked across it for 27 days, and while we were there, Israeli jets were constantly flying out and ignoring Lebanese airspace.
People always think of Middle East countries as very sort of sandy and dry, but Lebanon is a beautiful country.
That's why I wrote my book, because Lebanon, where I grew up above Beirut, which is, an incredible cosmopolitan city. It's an hour to the ski slopes, an hour to the beach was the cliche. It's incredible food. I always describe it as a cross between the south of France and areas of California. It's pine forest. It's utterly beautiful. But it's so hilly and so kind of areas of it quite remote that over the last 300-400 years, anyone that's been persecuted in the rest of the Middle East have kind of found themselves in Lebanon, bought themselves a hill and set up an army there. And that's why for ages Lebanon was, a fiefdom with sort of 13, 14 different sort of militias and warlords all fighting each other. The most complicated thing I ever saw was a Time magazine diagram trying to explain who is fighting who in Lebanon, who's allied to, and honestly it was more complicated than the House of Cards. But in short, to the answer to the question, I think there will be a ceasefire. I think it will hold. I think what Israel will do, what they're wanting, is a buffer zone in the south. And I think that's what they'll implement, and they'll do what they did for ages and possibly keep people within that buffer zone. But what's extraordinary is in Lebanon itself, life goes on. My sister today was just sending me extraordinary footage of bombing at the airport, which we can see from our house. And from the smoke of the bomb, you can see an MEA, Middle East Airlines plane take off and go through. And if anything sort of epitomises Lebanon, it's that.
Layla Moran, you are half Palestinian. You have skin in this game too.
Yeah, I do. I think this is a good thing. And if you look across, whenever you've got conflicts like this, and it's, I think, fair to say that, Israel, Hezbollah conflict. The caller said, across the whole of Lebanon. I mean, this is very much about Hezbollah, and even the Israeli government makes clear this is not about the Lebanese people, although they're very
it's affecting them.
Absolutely, but they are very much caught in the middle, and I completely agree with you, Tom. They've gone far too far. But it's also linked to Gaza, and it's also linked to the wider instability in the region. My hope for this, and I'm nothing if not an optimist, and for what it's worth, Tom, we've not met before, but I'm where you are politically. I am absolutely about get the extremists out.
But that seems to be a really...
very niche.
That seems to be,
but it's nice to find another one.
But why is that so niche? I mean, it's ridiculous.
No, I know. But I'll tell you something, though. I find it interesting that the people who take our view are people who have skin in the game.
Well, I tell you what really irritates me is people that are extremists on either side who none of them have ever visited that area,
Indeed.
don't speak any of the language, have never had to deal with the situation that's there. And it drives me nuts.
I completely agree with you. But on this, I mean, my hope is that, yes, I think it will hold. And if you look in history when these kinds of... I mean, do you remember when we were sort of all talking about pause versus ceasefire or whatever? I mean, this is a pause. This is what this is.
Yeah.
It's a 60-day pause, ceasefire. And what often happens with pauses is it's a pause. Sometimes you might have one or other side, something goes off, there's a scuffle, but actually it goes back to pause. And once you start pausing, it very often leads to further ceasefires. And what I hope is that this is the beginning of wider set of ceasefires that will include Gaza, which allows aid in, hostages out, and a start to look at what happens the next day. But the question, I think, was slightly posing a bit wider. How do we, a ceasefire that holds? For me, a ceasefire that holds forever is peace. And the end of this war is not peace. There's a huge, huge chasm to go between where we are now to the killing in the immediate sense stopping, and then where do we get to in the future? And that has to include a viable Palestinian state with security, not just for Israel and Palestine, but also for Lebanon and the whole of the Levant as a whole.
We're talking as if this ceasefire is actually going to happen. The Israeli War Cabinet hasn't yet voted on it.
I mean, the problem... Sorry,
let me just finish that, because the background is important. If it votes in favour, the ceasefire would begin at 10 a.m. local time tomorrow, so 8 a.m. here in the UK. Joe Biden is expected to speak about this ceasefire from the White House Rose Garden at some point this evening.
I mean, just the problem with Lebanon, just to finish with that, is one of the reasons what has to happen with the ceasefire is there's been no basically functioning government in Lebanon for at least 10 years. Elections have been completely frozen. Hezbollah are a state within a state. And so one of the things that does need to happen within a ceasefire is the Lebanese, taking back control of their own country.
Camilla.
I think you've both raised really important points there, and I think what's a cause for optimism with this ceasefire is that this could, albeit temporary, it could lay the groundwork for a more long-term solution, and then could also perhaps help to propel the situation in Gaza to bring that to a close as well. I think in Lebanon, the kind of war goal from Israel's point of view has been very clear and also a bit more manageable from the start, which is pushing Hezbollah back to north of the Litani River, which is what the UN resolution that ended the last conflict was meant to happen. But over time, it's been kind of gradually eroded. And yes, as you say, Hezbollah are a state within a state that have got increasingly kind of aggressive and assertive in recent years, but at least there is a kind of a Lebanese government to do business with, and to an extent to help implement that ceasefire. And if out of this a more stable and more kind of forthright Lebanese government can emerge, perhaps with other pressure points from America and the region, that would also be a really positive
What
step.
fascinates me is I would imagine that this can only have been agreed with the agreement of Iran. I mean, Hezbollah can't do anything without that.
No, they can't.
I would have thought.
And no one ever talks about Iran in this, but yeah.
Helen.
Well, I don't have so much skin in the game as Dom, for instance. But I have visited Lebanon about 12 years ago for actually really, really good friends' wedding. So then watching, on the TV or my phone, the bombing of Beirut, and I can picture the places that I was in when I was there. And it really brings home, as best it can when you're not there. Sort of what to me was, very a civilized, lovely place to visit. Going through that, seeing this news, I hope that this ceasefire will come into effect, and that it will then endure and be a basis for peace, and that on the attacks on both sides of the border will stop, and that as Layla was saying, in a direction of peace across the Middle East, building on this.
Both of you know a lot about this because you've both got family in the region. Can you be optimistic about some sort of longer-term settlement? Because I said on the programme a few months ago, what it needs is a sort of Barack Obama figure to emerge from the Israeli side and a Nelson Mandela figure to emerge from the Palestinian side. And so I can't see any hope of that happening. And yesterday on the programme, someone said, well, there is actually a Nelson Mandela figure who the Israelis have got in prison at the moment. I can't remember his name. That's the one. That's the one.
So his son, Arab, has been here. In fact, he came and Marwan's wife, Arab's mother, was here. I've met with them. I mean, he's sort of held up as the Nelson Mandela figure. It's worth saying there are actually others, and the plight of Palestinian political prisoners is real. It's really important, because what happens in the West Bank is when anyone sticks their head above the parapet and starts to say, right, I'm going to try and unite the Palestinian political factions, they are very often put in prison, very often without trial, and they're kept there for a very long time. So there is a genuine issue here around allowing, and the Israelis will say, and I'm sure they'll write into the programme, and me probably as well, to say, it's because they are terrorists, and Marwan Barghouti is a terrorist, and it's for security reasons and all that. Nelson Mandela was also considered a terrorist, and there are going to be people who are going to perhaps be unpalatable to parts of Israeli society, that they are going to have to try and allow the Palestinian political landscape to coalesce around, if you're going to have a united Palestinian peoples who can then go to elections. And by the way, Palestinians want elections. I know Israel often says it's the only democratic state in the region. Palestinians want elections. The reasons they often haven't had it are for reasons that they can't get everyone to vote, and that's to do with Jerusalem, and it's all very complicated. But I do believe that at the heart of Palestine are democratic
that the Palestinian Authority hasn't had an election since whenever it is.
The PA is not the PLO. This is the key thing, okay? So the reason why they hold up Marwan Barghouti as someone who might be able to unite is he's one of the only figures who might be able to unite all factions, and I dare say including some of the very most unpalatable factions, in order to have and he's anti-violence. When he talks about this now anyway, people will point out he turned to violence in the past, allegedly, but when it comes to now, he talks about finding a way forward that is non-violent. That's the important bit. How do we go from where we are now to where we are later, and actually uniting the Palestinian people around a common cause and ideally a common person? He's the name that comes up, but there may well be others.
And similarly, in Lebanon, I interviewed a young Lebanese member of parliament a couple of months ago, and I thought, well, if they're all like you, your country would have a really bright future.
Well, the tragedy of Lebanon is that, it's been run for so long under sort of, even its constitution is broken down through, the Prime Minister has to be a Maronite, and it's broken down through the various religious factions. And there was about 10 years ago a movement of sort of secular young people that really tried to sort of break through that, and it failed. And unfortunately, Lebanese are always optimistic about their country, and they've always managed to keep it going. And what actually broke the back of Lebanon was when that explosion happened in the port. It was extraordinary, that the one sort of warlike explosion that happened, it was probably more to do with corruption and whatever, and that literally broke the economy of Lebanon, and that's been the real tragedy in the last 3 or 4 years. So Lebanon now is unbelievable extremes of people living on dollars and living very happily, and people absolutely in trouble. And it's the first time I've seen Lebanese sort of resilience and optimism disappear, but it will come back. It is an extraordinary country for that.